Right, okay. So we're back into Ruth and the first chapter, and hopefully you've all got a Bible of whatever translation. Maybe you've got more than one Bible. I think Ambrose possibly has got at least two ready.
Yes, I've got the New King James and the NIV.
Um, so let's uh, go down to let's go back slightly. We're really talking about verse 14 onwards, but let's read from verse 11 to the end of the chapter. And if somebody would like to read that for us, please, in any version that you like. If you'll watch in the versions that you've got open, so that if there's something different in what you're hearing from what you've got in front of you, then perhaps you'd share that with us, and that may help our understanding. So who's going to do that for us, please?
Why then? But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey, and when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "It is really Naomi," the women asked. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. "Don't call me Naomi," she responded. "Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law, Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest.
Thank you. That was lovely. And would you please...
NBI application, NTL application.
Sorry, what is the name of the version?
Life Application Study Bible.
Oh, right.
NLT.
Oh, okay. So it's New Living Translation. Okay. Right. Okay. So
I've got three Bibles here to choose from.
Okay. Just so we can put our discussion into context, just to remind you of the story so far. There's the story involves a situation in which a Jewish man whose name was
Elimelech.
Elimelech. Good, went out my head. His name is Elimelech. It's mentioned in verse 1. They lived in Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of bread. And so it's a place where food was in plenty normally, but there comes a time when there's a famine. And all this is taking place in the time when Israel was ruled over by judges. And that was not a strong spiritual time. So very often it was a time of backsliding, and then God would, when they got into trouble, they would cry to God, and God would send someone to deliver them. maybe somebody like Samson, or somebody quite tough, and included some tough women. And then Elimelech decides that because there's a famine affecting his country, he'll move his family to Moab, which was the other side of the Dead Sea. So that's what he does, and they settle there for a while. We don't know how long he intended to stay there, but during that time, the two sons that they had, Mahlon and Chilion, whose names mean sickly and a failure, and these two guys get married to Moabite women, and then Elimelech dies, the two sons die, and Naomi is just left with her two daughters-in-law. And then she hears that the famine has ended and that there is food back home, so she makes her way back to Bethlehem, from where she came. And on the way, she realizes that that's not necessarily a good plan for the two daughters-in-law, so she encourages them to go back. And that's more or less where we picked it up, because what happens is that at first they don't want to do that, but she presses them to go back, says, look, the future will be hopeless if you go with me. So go back to your homes and to your gods. And Orpah decides she will go back, so she kisses her mother-in-law and goes back, and Ruth hangs on to her. Now, sometimes Orpah is projected as somebody who's a bit unfaithful, but she was only doing what her mother-in-law insisted she should do. So it's Ruth who's doing the very unusual thing by clinging very tightly, it said in the version that Chrissy was reading from, held on to her very tightly. NIV says that she clung to her. It has that sense of really holding on tightly. You'd have a difficulty to prise them apart, that sort of holding on tightly. So that's where we're at. And when I read this through, a number of things jumped out at me. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different applications just out of these last verses of this chapter. But before I share anything, let's open it up and just think about the business of Orpah kissing her mother goodbye and going back, and Ruth not going back, staying. She's going to stay, and she uses very strong language. So verses 16 to 18, she uses very, very strong language to say that she's going to stick with Naomi. And in fact, she's so determined to stay with her that she says, well, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely. In other words, I don't mind what God does to me, if even death separates. Now, if even death separates you and me. So there's things in that statement which do need unpacking and thinking about. But anybody want to share their initial thoughts and comments? Everybody's welcome to say anything they like. We don't sit in judgment on each other. We want to encourage your comments. We want to encourage your questions. So if you've already done Bible study and looked it up in concordances, be ready to share your riches. If it's coming to you fresh, well, share your impressions. That's just as valuable sometimes.
I've read that Moab and Israel were bitter enemies. So actually, you think it would be quite a brave thing for them to have gone from Judah into Moab to start with. And it was also a brave thing for Ruth to go back.
Yeah. David came up with an interesting suggestion last week when we were thinking about the fact that they packed up and left Bethlehem and went to Moab. And he asked a question which we cannot give the answer to, but was it a sign of a lack of faith on Elimelech's part to not stay at Bethlehem, which is the land that God had given them? Should he have trusted God and stayed there? Or was it his moving to Moab, was that a sign of unbelief? We don't know. We don't know, but it's a good question. Coming
I
back,
mean, when you think about the fact that there were bitter enemies, it actually needed a lot of faith and believing that God was look after them, going to a country that was opposed to Israel, wasn't it?
yeah, not quite as bad, I think, as things are currently in the Middle East, but they were not particularly friendly.
Yeah.
I wondered whether, because these two sons had such, well, names that implied they were very weak, I wonder whether Elimelech thought they wouldn't survive a famine. And that's why he was, tempted to go to somewhere that seemed that they'd be more nourished. But it didn't work out, did it?
That it was while they're in Moab that they had the sons had taken wives. So it wasn't a case of whether they could survive back in Bethlehem.
Well, their names imply that they were sort of sickly, doesn't it?
Yes.
So
yeah, and
I mean,
that would have been the names that they were given from infant life. So
I thought that maybe he was thinking they're not going to survive the famine if I keep them here. We'll all go into Moab so they can sort of be built up physically.
Yeah,
but it didn't
what I was
work
saying is I don't think they existed in Bethlehem. I think they got married in Moab.
Yeah.
So they weren't in Bethlehem where the famine was.
It does say they were in Bethlehem. It says, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, and the name of his two sons. And Ephraim of Bethlehem, Judah. So they immigrated as a family.
Yeah. Okay, let's clarify it. Okay. Their sons existed. So we've got a family of 4, of which the sons appear not to be very robust physically. Okay. And they are living in Bethlehem. And the famine comes and affects Bethlehem. So Elimelech takes the family to Moab, and it's while they're there that the 2 boys married. If you're saying, did Elimelech think, well, the boys aren't very strong, if we stay here, they are at risk, then I understand, but I had misunderstood you previously.
Yeah.
It's giving an excuse for Elimelech's apparent lack of faith. But it's still a lack of faith, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we can interpret it that way.
But possibly,
we are entitled to put an interpretation on it. But rule for preaching is never base a text on a supposition.
Can I give another supposition? Because
well, David, where we are
because Elimelech and Naomi and the 2 sons did not exist and live in isolation. They were part of a community, because if you read at the beginning of Joshua, and when they came into the promised land, every tribe was allocated a land, and that was divided up between every family, every clan and every family. So where was the rest of the family when this family was struggling?
Well, at least we know that there was another family that was part of the clan that stayed in Bethlehem.
There's 2, because there was the other person who had it in the last chapter.
Right. Yeah, 2 more families.
So what was Boas's dad doing when this family was struggling?
Yeah. Well, we don't actually know that they didn't, that there weren't others who went with them, is it? I mean, it's just that they're not mentioned. It may be that others went with them.
But they must have been they were famous, because Naomi, as soon as she turned up, everybody said, oh, there's a Naomi.
Yes.
So it's just, I just think that sort of we pick up this idea that sort of everything in the promised land was hunky-dory and they were following the law. And I think if they were following the law, there would have been other ways of dealing with it, but that Elimelech has to make that decision. Do I trust in God? Do I trust in the community, or do I go and save my family by going to the enemy?
Yeah, I think both your comments are interesting, David. I think the one raising a question about the lack of faith is interesting. I think the issue of the relationship to others, make it a decision. In our own Christian faith, isn't it easy that we make decisions about what God is saying to us and what we're meant to do without thinking about, well, how does this fit with what God is saying and doing for our sisters and brothers that we're in fellowship with?
Yeah.
How does it impact them? So there's two dimensions that we're thinking about.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that this book is more than just a story of a family. It's here and it's packed with sort of nuances and lessons. It reflects the history of Israel, and it also points forward to Jesus and points forward to salvation and the Christian life and our responsibility within the kingdom of God. So all of this is really a valuable book because of the way in which it can be interpreted and has been interpreted since it was first published. And we don't know when, but if you like to think in terms of the fact that it could have been post-exile, then the issue of being in a foreign land and coming back, all of that ties in with the experience of Israel at that time. So that, they could have drawn important lessons that were relevant for the days in which they lived, just as we can and are.
The thing about Moab as well is that there was quite a rich history of Moab being in conflict with Israel and it not being in conflict with Israel. There was a history of economic cooperation between the two nations and that kind of thing. It's not that they were completely at war with each other. I mean, no. there was fluidity there. And you talk about this going to a distant land. I mean, you're talking 75 miles. That's a distance, approximately the distance that they travel. So for me, that would be like for me, from where I am, to go, to the end of Cumbria, somewhere like that. It's not a great distance. And if you think about it, they existed. They went into Moab. They lived there and they coexisted quite easily. They must have done. The sons married these Moabite women. They must have been accepted within the community. So it wouldn't be just a case of they were living in this hostile territory. There were historical differences, obviously, which we know about. But at the end of the day, it's the same, isn't it, with two countries who sometimes are at peace with each other, sometimes at war, but a lot of the time are economically cooperating and crossing each other's borders. And there was a famine. And so and Moab actually was a more fertile area than Bethlehem, Jerusalem, than Judah. That's why. So there it is.
Thank you, Bob. Good points in there. We talked about last week about God declaring war on Moab because of the issue with Barak and trying to bring a curse on Israel. But we didn't want to dwell too much on that. But all the comments are fine, and so they weren't moving into enemy territory necessarily, but they were going to an alien or a foreign place, and they weren't staying in the land that God had given them by covenant. So that there's issues to ponder that. We could say, looking at it naturally, Elimelech made a great idea. That's the sensible thing to do. Let's move over to Moab because we know that's fertile. And obviously the famine had not affected it, so it was a good place to be. And I think sometimes in our lives we do make decisions and naturally it looks right, but it doesn't always prove to be right. What we can draw from this is that whatever the cause for Elimelech to decide he was going to move to Moab, God had got a plan and a purpose. And this story of Ruth unfolds. So this book is named after Ruth, a Moabite, okay? And she becomes quite significant because we know that she is an ancestor of Jesus. So, you know, it's really quite interesting. I don't know whether she's an ancestor of Jesus or an ancestor of Joseph, but anyway, but she's important. She gets mentioned in Matthew in the genealogy.
Yeah, she's a great grandmother of King David, isn't she? And she's the,
Yes, yes, she was David's great granny, and we also know
Granny Ruth.
we also know therefore
Granny
that Jesus comes from that line. So she's in the family tree. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Well, yeah. Well, one thing I've always wondered about when they go off to a different country is where do they live? I mean, did they take tents with them, or did they have friends in Moab already who they knew would look after them? Because I mean, you know, we don't go off to a strange place if we don't know where we're going to be staying, do we?
It's a really good question. Now, the funny thing is that I was thinking about Passover, which has been celebrated recently, but also thinking in terms of Passover at the time when Jesus was crucified. And we know that he started out in Galilee and he starts heading off to go to Jerusalem. He's determined to go to Jerusalem. Just to quote from an Old Testament passage, he sets his face like flint. They're absolutely determined to get there, even though he knows that he's going to suffer when he gets there. So he's determined to go. Now it's going to take about a week to walk from Galilee to Jerusalem. So it's quite a long journey. And I thought exactly what you've just said, John.
Right.
Did they take tents? You know, how did they manage? You know, who carried the food? You know, where did they get their water? Or, you know, some of these things are worth thinking about, really.
Well, I'd have
But we
thought
don't
in
know.
their
We
own
just don't
country, I
know.
mean, that people were taught to be very hospitable, weren't they?
Yes.
It was quite common for them to provide places for people traveling through. But if you're going to a foreign country, then I thought things would probably be a bit different.
Well, possibly not in the culture of the day.
No, perhaps not.
I suspect that it would have been similar. But the with Jesus coming to Jerusalem, sorry, with Mary and Joseph coming to Jerusalem, they were looking to stay in a guest chamber. So it's quite probable that there were relatives that they were expected to be able to stay with, but the journey had taken possibly longer because of Mary's pregnancy. Might have taken a little bit longer, and they turned up when the guest chamber was fully occupied, so there wasn't any more room. Right, okay, let's stay with Ruth. Any more comments or questions? I've got
Yeah.
few thoughts.
Yes. In the passage where it said, "Your God will be my God," and so forth, there are two aspects, aren't there? Number one, Ruth really valued her mother-in-law.
Yes.
Number two, what did she see in her mother-in-law? And even though her mother-in-law was saying, "The Lord has dealt bitterly with me," she is still hearing an acknowledgement of the Lord, the God of Israel. And I just wonder about that factor and how much that influenced Ruth to want to go with her mother-in-law.
Yeah,
That was perhaps the most important part of it, because I think, however, I mean, the both girls seemed very fond of Naomi. I mean, what's her name?
Naomi.
Naomi,
Naomi.
Naomi,
yes.
yeah.
They were obviously both very fond of her, but it wasn't strong enough to keep the other one. So I think it was to do with the faith.
Yeah.
And Ruth thinking, if I go back, I've got to decide what to do about my faith. So I suspect it was her belief, you know, in the God of Israel that was the strongest element. This is what I felt.
I
Now
think
that was
that's
the kind of
absolutely
comment that we
right,
had
that.
last week, isn't it? Do we know? Did Ruth have a conversion experience, and where did it happen? But we do know that there is a conversion experience here, because she says this statement: "May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." And she invokes the name of Yahweh in that. So she's using the covenant name of God, whereas later on, Naomi doesn't. She uses El Shaddai, the Lord Almighty. So there is a you know there's something that we can draw out of that indicates something special when she says, "May the Lord," that's Jehovah, Yahweh, "deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you." And there's such a powerful thing behind that, because the custom was always that people were buried in their family graves. So that was the custom of the day. I understand in Moab and in Israel. So she is not only being bold and going on this journey to accompany Naomi to an alien situation, a situation she would not have known about, and a different culture, but she was willing to go and do that, which is interesting. But she's willing to do it, even so, she says that she's going to die and she's going to be buried where Naomi's going to be buried. So it's an absolute commitment. So I made two particular notes when I was reading this. First one was the issue of faith, moving forward in faith. She had made a decision to go on a journey which she felt she should go on. And for us as Christians, there's the whole issue about our obedience when God calls us to move on, to let go of where we are and being willing to move on. And I know, I look into my heart, I know that there was a time when I knew God was calling me to do something, but I was finding it very difficult to let go. And maybe that's happened more than once in my life. So being called to move on and to have enough faith to do, for her to go into a foreign country with a strange culture was a big issue, but she's buying into it, the whole thing. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people, my people. Your God, also my God. Where you die, I will also die, and I'll be buried there. So it's an absolute commitment. So my comments are, first of all, how does this relate to things God calls us to move forward and be willing to let go and forsake where we've been? And the second thing is her commitment to Naomi is absolute, and is our commitment to Christ equally absolute. What made her want to have that absolute commitment to Ruth? Well, somebody's already said it, maybe three people have said it. That little word love is what makes the difference. And of course, it's what makes a difference in our devotion to Jesus, is love. Our total, absolute commitment to trust him and go where he leads is because we love him. Anybody want to comment on that?
I'd like to, I mean, Naomi, in my opinion, Naomi has revealed God to Ruth. He's revealed, Naomi's shown who God is. In that time that they've lived together, by the way that Naomi has lived her life, whether she preached the word to her, where she shared the scriptures with her, where she's shown her by example, where she's shown her, that Naomi's integrity has shone through and has inspired Ruth. We have to have an example. We have to see what it's like to live that life. We need people to show us. And I think it is Naomi that who has inspired us to such an extent, and has inspired such love and commitment, and has led her to God, and that she cannot imagine not living with her, and she associates the God of Jacob with Naomi, and therefore wants to go to that land, and knows that's where she has to go, and everything else, nothing else really matters. And I think it is Naomi. I think she's a very inspiring individual, a very inspiring woman, a lovely woman.
Yes. And also she's lost her husband and they've lost their husbands.
Yeah.
So she would, she's bringing them together really, and they're sharing the grief, and they must see how she's behaved, and, and they're trying to do likewise. They must have come very close, I should think, in grief. I'm sure they would have done.
There's what you've just said, Bob, is great, and I'm sure that her testimony of faith in Jehovah would have been shared, and she would have seen something. There must have been something attractive in it. It made me think of a hymn. There's an old gospel hymn, which I've now looked up specially. It's in Redemption Hymnal, and it's based on a verse from Numbers: "Come thou with us, and we will do you good." And that was what was said by Moses. And so the hymn goes like this: "Come," it's Old English, of course. "Come thou with us, O soul oppressed, and we will do thee good. We are the people of the Lord, redeemed by Jesus' blood. He called us out of darkness, from the thraldom of our sin, and he gave us life and liberty, his peace and joy within. Oh, come with us, we pray, this bright and happy heavenly way, the way of life, the way of joy and peace. If you come, for come you may, you will share with us today the pleasures of his love, which never cease." But it's really super. And there's a verse that says, "Come thou with us with firm resolve, and we will do thee good. Nor plant thy feet upon the road, the saints now plant thy feet upon the road, the saints of old have trod. Forsake the path of sin, and choose the pathway of the King, where the redeemed of the Lord delight in saving grace to sing." And it goes, "Oh, come with us today, this bright and heavenly way." It's just a way. I used to love singing it, really. Come on.
Go on then.
Okay, so my points: forward in faith and steadfast commitment to Christ. Okay. Anybody want to pull anything else in? We've had quite a chat about these verses. Right, let's travel on then with Naomi and Ruth, holding hand in hand, perhaps, and going on. And so verse 19, the two women went on till they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" And in my notes I put down causing a stir. When wherever we go, do we cause a stir? Doesn't have to be a stir because we look miserable, which it was with Naomi, but just the wow. Oh goodness, here's John, or here's Jean, or whatever. It's just so that our turning up causes a stir. And I want to pray that God will make all of us the kind of people that cause a stir wherever we go. So these last verses with Naomi saying, don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant, call me Mara, the word means bitter, because, and this is important, the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? And then she says, the Lord, so where she does talk about Yahweh, the Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Blaming God for her misery.
Is it
Come on, let's have
blame?
a few comments. Ambrose.
Is it blaming God or acknowledging something?
Mm.
It's a very, very powerful question, isn't it? When I set out on my journey this morning to go to Milton Keynes, I prayed the Lord would give me a safe journey and keep me from being a danger to others. And twice I was held up in the traffic, and I arrived 20 minutes late for my meeting this morning. And in the past, I would mutter about it, all these cars that causing this delay and all this problem, and why isn't God answering prayer? Give me a fast road through. Now I thank God for the delay. Usually I think it probably saves me from meeting with some disaster. So I'm happy to be set back on my journey. So I'm quite happy for it to be God who sets me back on my timetable. It's not a problem to me because I can still trust him. Is that what you were suggesting, Ambrose?
I was just a bit worried about terminology. And if you say blame, it sounds like you're accusing almost. And it's just a caution I have from my old Baptist background.
Do you see that Naomi is blaming God?
Well, you use the word blame.
Mm.
Well, it seems to me she is saying that God has done this.
Mm.
Yeah, but was she blaming God or just saying God has done this, but not necessarily and acknowledging he could have stopped it, but was she actually blaming God or just accepting?
Yeah, and there's a difference there to me, a big difference. It's something I have a problem with because we say God is in charge of everything, and therefore we blame God for everything that happens, especially all the bad things that happen. But I'm more of the way that these things, well, there's an evil in the world because there was from Adam. These things are there, and God will help us through them rather than God. Can God cause evil? I don't know. It's a problem I have.
Okay, well, God cannot do evil anyway, can he?
That's it.
But we know that he allows evil, and we know that evil things. We've got the story of Job, if we want to sort of delve into that a bit more. But just hold of the words that she uses. The Almighty has made my life very bitter.
Yeah,
I don't think she's
that's a blame,
passive
isn't
and
it?
accepting. I think she's pretty peeved about it.
I think also she's thinking of her past with rose-tinted spectacles, because if they were so happy and well off, why did they leave?
Oh no, I think she's saying her whole life was bitter. I've got the impression right from the time she was in Israel and had to move away because of famine. That was a bad thing.
Well,
then she lost her son's Moab, which was a bad thing. Then her husband, bad thing. Everything that seems to have happened since she got married were bad things, which she's blaming on God.
Jean, just notice the other phrase she uses. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. So when they left Bethlehem, she described her life as full. She was a happy wife and mother, and she's lost her husband and her sons.
You see, I don't understand that because I didn't. If I was leaving England because of the famine, it wouldn't be because I wanted to leave England because of a famine. I would have thought you only left it because you felt you had no choice. So I don't know what she means by feel full. Unless, I wonder if she's meaning full in the terms all she wants is a husband and 2 sons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the way she's full, not
Yes.
in the famine or what happens.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's
I'm
anything to
there.
do with material
I'm
things. I think it has entirely to do with social
With her
and relational.
sons.
She
Yeah.
is almost a Job-like figure
Hmm.
that
She loses it all.
she loses everything. And I think if you read Job, he feels quite bitter at times towards God.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not saying she. I think that sometimes we assume that when people say things, they're right in what they're saying.
Yes.
But I think that's how. I think it's natural and human that when everything's been taken away from you, you start to feel bitter. But the beautiful thing is God can take that bitterness and redeem it, which I think, which is what happens in the. I think this is a point in the story where she's feeling bitter.
The other question that I think one always asks when things go wrong is, what have I done to deserve this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots of people ask
Is
that,
it
don't
my
they?
fault? Is it my
Yes,
fault?
yes.
I think when people ask that question, sometimes it might be an objective comment. What have I done to deserve this? But I think sometimes it's an expression that I'm all right, I'm perfect, and this should not have happened to me because I'm so good. So again, I think we know that the sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous, and we need to sort of remember that life. I mean, one of the phrases that came out very strongly in the video we looked at last week was "it so happened." It so happened, and that phrase does come up in different ways in this story. And the issue of chance and providence, the balance, other things that sometimes happen in our lives that may appear to be chance. Are we going to say, but God works in my life, the God who has covenanted with me, he's made me his child, he's adopted me into his family. Who am I? I'm now a child of God. I'm beloved of God. He's done all this for me, you know, and I should be able to trust him through the bad times as well as the good, not because I deserve it, but because of who he is and what he has done in covenant love for me. Jesus, the eternal Son of God, bled and died on a cruel cross for me and my salvation. Wow, that's an amazing love, isn't it? And we need to never lose sight of how precious we are to God, so that whatever our circumstances and wherever we go with that wonderful assurance. I told David and others this morning, I woke up with Psalm 23 swimming in my mind, and it was to the tune that goes, "The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want, he makes me down to lie," which we decided was a 20th century hymn tune.
St. James.
Was it?
Brother James, brother
James.
Oh, right. So, I had not been reading Psalm 23. I had not been singing the tune, but it was singing in my head when I woke up, and it's just this sense of the psalmist saying, "Well, I might have to go through the valley of the shadow of death, you know, but even there, you're going to be with me. You are going to be with me. Your rod and staff comfort me." But it's that the rod and staff is ancillary. It's, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me," you know. And the fact that we can trust God. And in the meeting we had today, David and I, with others from the RMS team, we reflected a few months about that. And Bob had put up something about remembering whose we are. Remembering whose we are, not who we are, but whose we are. The importance of remembering whose we are. So I think there are things there, but I think I really do think she's right at the bottom of the misery pit, really. And if we think about how did this speak to an exiled people, how did the people in exile take this, you know? And if you think about Jeremiah and what he prophesied into it, you know, you may feel that God has abandoned you and forsaken you, but that's not what he does. God says, I know I've got plans for you. I've not forgotten you. I've not forsaken you. I've still got plans for you, plans for good and not evil, for a future and a hope, you know. So he's saying, hold tight. And then Jeremiah says, but you're going to sit tight here for 70 years, you know. So, you know, it's an interesting issue. And I think for us as Christians, we go through life's experiences. Sometimes it's hard. I don't know, it might have been Ambrose's granddad said it, but someone in Ambrose's family used the phrase once to me, and it stuck so much because it blessed me. Sometimes we have to trust God when we cannot trace God. Sometimes we have to trust God when we cannot trace God. And those are the times it's hard, when I no longer feel saved. I no longer feel blessed, you know. And it's hard to trust God.
What I like about the Old Testament is that you know, there's a brutal honesty about it. That people do call out and cry out, and they do curse God. And Naomi is not acting really she's not acting outside of that. The Lord has dealt bitterly with me, and she gives herself that name. And I think it, you know, one of the best books in the Bible to read, you know, the Theodicy is the book of Job, because no matter how, you know, we are tested in these really, really hard times. And there is that wonderful bit in Job, and it's very short, I'll read it to you, where Job is there scraping the boils off his skin with bits of broken pottery. He's covered with boils. He's in absolute misery. And then his wife says unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. And that's basically it. You know, life is ups and downs, and it's all in accordance with God's plan. And if it hurts, we might as well cry out and say it hurts, and say we're fed up, and then get over it and get on with it. And that's what we've got to do. There's something very stoical about that, you know, that in that attitude. But we're not really in a position to judge people in the pits of such misery as that, because, you know, the pain of bereavement and everything, you know, is one of the worst pain. You know, it's just unbelievable for some people, especially when the children die. So, you know, we have to be honest with ourselves.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the points I put down. So that was my fourth point, her honesty and being honest about her circumstances. Many years ago, there was a lady called Jean Rees. She was the wife of a leading Christian evangelist called Tom Rees, who was alive when she wrote it. She wrote a book called Saints Alive, and included all sorts of funny witticisms about the things that are said in church. and she said about someone who stood up to give a testimony, and they thought they'd not had a very dramatic conversion, but they put it across as if it were, and said, "There were no depths of sin to which I did not sink when I was gloriously saved at the age of 5." And you know, just trying to pump it up and put the spin on it, you know. But we don't do God favors when we color the situation. We need to be honest about it. So when the gospel is preached, we ought perhaps, what do you think, to say, will you follow Jesus and take up a cross and be willing to give your life for him? You know, it's not a bed of roses, is it?
Certainly not.
Roses in it, but it also has thorns.
I know, I mean, I've said this before, I lost my husband tragically, just dropped dead with a heart attack, cutting the grass at church. But 30 years earlier, I'd lost my dad in the same way. And my mum said he just dropped dead on holiday. And she tried to sort of thing. And she said, I was frozen and I couldn't move to do anything. And I said to my sister at the time, I said, you know, I said, she must have done something. I said, I taught her what to do. And she said, and my sister said, yeah, she must have done. And my mum said, I couldn't, I was frozen. Anyway, that went out of my mind till I lost my husband and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't open his airway or anything. I was frozen, I couldn't move. And it absolutely haunted me afterwards, because I taught first aid for 30 years in St John's Ambulance. And so, you know, I thought, gosh, I never opened his airway and I never think. And I just sort of shut off. And I said, Lord, this is so cruel. I said, I'm going to wait till I get up there. I said, then you've got to explain this to me. But it was identical. And I seen my daughters crying and saying, oh, lost daddy. And I'd done the same those 30 years before. And it was identical. And people couldn't, you know, when I said, you know, I said, this is what I said, I just can't believe. And somebody said to me, well, you may have gone through that so that you could understand this time, you know. And I thought, I'm sorry, but, you know, that's not it, you know, sort of thing. And I still can't quite, you know, because afterwards people said, and my husband came to faith later on in life. He was a very good Christian at the beginning, but sort of things happened. And, you know, but I mean, we've been together taking communion and that for about 15 years. So, you know, but he was still beginning, I think, on the pathway, you know, and sort of, and I just thought, oh gosh, Lord, he was just starting to, you know, sort of, yes, you know, realize things. And we were just starting to think of things together and praying together, you know, and then the Lord had taken him, you know, sort of thing. So, so it was very hard. And then, of course, a year afterwards, I was vaguely ill with this thing and in the hospital for a year. And so that was sort of traumatic, but I had lots and lots of, you know, miracles. I'm still here, but it was just sort of, it was just one thing after another, you know, and sort of, and it did really shake. And at one point, I just sort of, after I lost Robin, I was trying to pray and I couldn't pray, but everybody said, we're praying for you. And I felt that, but I just felt as though I was in a glass box, you know, and sort of, and I just wanted to be sort of on my own. And at one point, I felt so much agony and that, and I said to the Lord, I said, I know what agony is like now. This isn't pain, absolute agony. And then, you know, I thought of him on the cross and I thought, yeah, you know, sort of, it is agony sort of thing, and sort of, and that sort of brought me out again, you know, and I found my faith again.
Yes.
So, you know, but
yes.
I mean,
I think the issue of being honest is important. That was my 1, 2, 3, 4th line. And then my 5th line, and the phrasing is careful. It says suffering in the will of God. God is working out a plan and purpose for Naomi and Ruth. That's the underlying message of Ruth, that God has a plan and a purpose, and he's working it out. And we were thinking last week how amazing it is that our little bit of life story fits in with God's big narrative somehow, and the good and the bad. So we have wonderful poems and hymns and things that have been written to try to encourage us. I often think about the one about the loom. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why the threads something of black threads or something as important as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern that God has planned. And it's not until, you know, we won't understand, we'll never get the answers.
Yeah.
The psalmist cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, and we go through these dark, difficult times, and we need to be honest about it, and we need to sort of hold on and keep our trust in God. But we will sometimes suffer in the will of God, that in the pathway that we travel, it will sometimes be dark and difficult and painful, and coming to terms with that is important, which is what Job does. And he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. I know that someone's going to make sense of all this. You know, it's going to work out in the end. I know that my Redeemer lives, and his feet are going to be here. You know, he's going to be in this place where I am suffering and pain. I will see my Redeemer here, and that he does, of course.
Oh,
So it's
Well-
there to challenge us, really, David.
When I was at Bible college, one of the other students was a songwriter, and I've tried to get hold of his music in recent years, but one song that he wrote, the words have stuck with me in my life. It's sort of, who said the road would be easy? Who said your problems would go? Who would said you'd live on a permanent high, never again feeling low? I said, take up your cross and follow. Leave your own ambitions behind. Offer yourselves, and I will renew your mind. And those words I just remember from over 30, 40 years ago.
Yes.
And I think, I just think Naomi's name of being happy, God doesn't actually offer us happiness, he offers us something better. And that something better is joy.
Joy.
And that joy can sustain us even when things go wrong. Whereas happiness is about how I'm feeling at the moment.
Yes, it's about chance to some extent. The word happiness is a word, Old English word, perhaps.
Yeah.
Just time is really gone, so let's just follow your comment there, David. Thank you for it. By looking at verse 22. Okay, so the previous phrase is, the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Okay, the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth. The narrator is who doesn't say anything about God. God gets mentioned occasionally in the story, but the narrator doesn't sort of make any spiritual points to it. But it goes on to say, so Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem. I'm always very careful to pronounce Bethlehem and not Bethlehem. They arrived at Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. And what a wonderful storyteller this person is, you know, that it takes us into Naomi's utter misery, you know, how black, how dark, how dreadful it is. And then he says, and they've arrived just at the beginning of barley harvest. And it's like when you watch a series of stories on the television, you know, and each week it links and you think, I can see this is going to work out. You know, I can see what's going to come here. And the narrator is using a storytelling formula by putting at the end of this first part of the story something which leads us into the next part that says, but it's going to be better, that it's going to change. something is about to happen. Barley harvest was the first harvest. It preceded the wheat harvest, and it was from this that they brought the wave offering for the Lord. So this is the beginning of a harvest. So she left. The story starts leaving Bethlehem in a famine. She arrives back in Bethlehem at the beginning of a barley harvest. It's going to be pretty good. Ambrose.
Yes. In connection with that, I do like in verse 21 where it says, "But the Lord hath brought me back."
Mm,
Yes.
The Lord did it. He brought her back.
Yes.
Empty, but he brought her back.
Mm.
Yes.
Without a thing. You says.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this.
Mm.
I found it interesting. I'm finding reading through Ruth, there's so much, and I keep going back and thinking, what did this mean to the Israelites when they read it? You know, looking back on their history of all, the years coming through the wilderness and then coming into the promised land, and then all the spiritual ups and downs that they went through there and so on, and the good and bad times, the times when the Philistines were an oppressive presence, and yet God delivered them, and all of those things. And now they might be in exile. It may well have been that during exile they may have read this and said, but our God is a God who can redeem the situation. He turns things around.
This story just simply makes me think of the Lord's relationship with us, how he promises to be with us wherever we go, never to leave us nor forsake us. Nothing can separate us from his love, not even death. All these things that Ruth promised to Naomi, the Lord promises to us, doesn't he?
Mm. Yeah.
He does.